Good evening, everybody. Welcome to another edition of Scotland at 7. I'm Gordon Ross. In the studio with me this evening is our Rural Affairs correspondent, Day Tucker. Welcome back, Day.
Thank you.
Here to dissect the news this evening. And the first item on the list tonight, Day, is Boris Johnson. Now, Boris Johnson has appointed a key figure to the Grenfell Tower inquiry who has links to the company which made the cladding blamed for accelerating the fatal fire. The Prime Minister picked engineer Benita Mehra, to assist retired Judge Sir Martin Moore-Bick, who is leading the inquiry into the disaster, which claimed 72 lives. Ms Mehra's appointment was quietly announced in Downing Street just before Christmas on the 23rd of December, in a move suspected by some of the bereaved and survivors to have been an attempt to avoid public scrutiny and possible legal challenge. Ms Mehra previously ran an organisation which received £71,000 of grant money from a charitable arm of Arconic, the US conglomerate that made the aluminium composite cladding panels used on Grenfell. The Prime Minister has said that, Prime Minister Johnson said at the time that Cabinet Office officials had conducted due diligence about Mehra's appointment, which has not identified any concerns. He told Moore-Bick in a letter, "The Inquiries Act is also clear that I must not appoint a person who has a close association with an interested party unless those links could not reasonably be regarded as affecting the impartiality of the inquiry panel." He said Ms Mehra has confirmed that she is not aware of any conflict of interest. The inquiry has already found that Arconic's polyethylene-filled panels were the principal reason why the flames spread so rapidly up the building. Survivors and the bereaved said that the grant created a clear conflict of interest and described Ms Mehra's appointment as a slap in the face for their hopes of justice. Grenfell United is calling for her to stand down before hearings restart on the 27th of January with an examination of how Arconic cladding panels were chosen, their safety testing, marketing and promotion. The Arconic Foundation grant was awarded to Women's Engineering Society charity WES, which Ms Mehra chaired from 2015 and 2018 and remains a trustee. The charity confirmed that she had helped to draft the application and the funds arrived 3 months after the Grenfell fire in 2017. It was the largest grant received that year. The link is particularly sensitive because anger is running high amongst many survivors at the role played by manufacturers of the combustible cladding and the insulation materials used to reclad the tower during its 2016 refurbishment. The families of 69 victims and 177 survivors are separately suing Arconic and other materials manufacturers in the US courts for wrongful death. It has agreed any litigation should take place in the UK. The UK government has also banned the use of such panels in high-rise residential buildings. Ms Mehra was a late replacement for Professor Nabil Hamdi, an expert in housing and planning issues whose survivors had hoped could better understand the tensions between the council landlord and the tenants which preceded the disaster than Sir Moore-Bick, whose expertise is in construction contracts. Mr Johnson provided no explanation for the move, apart from saying Hamdi was unable to proceed with the appointment. The Cabinet Office said this week that Hamdi had reflected on the commitment required and had decided to withdraw. Concerned that Ms Mehra lacked the expertise in community relations, Grenfell United decided to investigate her background and found details of the Arconic Foundation's grant and the annual report and the accounts of the Women's Engineering Society. Karim Mousselhi, the Vice Chair of the Survivors and Bereaved Group, GU, asked how can she sit next to Sir Martin Moore-Bick when Arconic will be on the stand and is one of the organisations we need answers from in terms of what caused the deaths of our loved ones. Her society has been supported by Arconic and she will look at it from the perspective of Arconic doing good things for the industry, that they are a great organisation. Her perspective will be affected. We will be absolutely furious if she's kept on the platform and it would be morally wrong to keep this person there, said Mr Mousselhi. The report from the first phase of the inquiry restored a little bit of confidence. This has taken us 10 steps backwards. So Dave, what is your opinion on this piece? Are we surprised at this news?
Well, yes and no. It really does beggar belief that Boris Johnson or whoever is handling this hasn't researched, the background to this person, and just even the mention of Arconic should have rung alarm bells, and they should have backed off.
Do you
What
think?
is going on?
Well, this is one of the reasons I think we're looking at this story this evening. But it seems that this woman, this expert, is one stage removed from this. Although there is a clear link here, it's a link with an organisation, a charity of which she was a senior member, which received money from Arconic, as you said, and now she's being asked to oversee an inquiry into a fire caused by Arconic products. It is definitely, I think, a clear
I mean, one
conflict.
stage removed is not enough. There shouldn't be any link whatsoever.
Do you think there's been adequate due diligence? They
No.
mentioned due diligence in this.
Well, it's quite
complaint.
clear there hasn't been. And these poor people who are trying to get this looked into and sorted, they're there on their own. They were the ones that had to do the research into the background of this person because they'd never met her, they didn't know her.
And nobody would have told them.
They've
that
done
this
the due
person-
diligence
Yeah.
that should have been done by the government.
So it seems that maybe the government department, the civil service, has dropped the ball here.
Well, either that or they've been told to drop the bomb.
They've been. Do you think perhaps they have been told to downplay it?
I don't know. Who knows these days what's going on?
So apparently this was an appointment made by the Cabinet Office, which is a senior, and Boris Johnson is the head of it. He really is the ultimate.
Well, they're the sort
man
of
at the top.
the people that don't seem to be answerable to anybody, and this is the way he's running this government, isn't it?
But he obviously is not prepared to do that due diligence. It doesn't seem to matter
No.
much to him
No.
whether these people get the justice they wish or
Yeah,
not,
that-
or whether indeed the person investigating is impartial. Well, I'd like to move on from this one day, and another injustice, I think we could say here, that 5,000 people have died before they could be reimbursed for a government error which left the chronically ill and the disabled benefit claimants thousands of pounds out of pocket, it has emerged. Approximately 70,000 claimants were originally estimated to have been underpaid about £340 million between 2011 and 2014.
That's almost as much as what was on the bus.
We'll maybe return to that later on in this item, I think. But after being transferred from older benefits onto the Employment and Support Allowance, or ESA, during the government overhaul of incapacity benefits. The figures released on today, which showed 5,000 ill and disabled people died before receiving the money they were owed, were described as a national scandal by Marsha de Cordova, the Labour MP and disability rights campaigner. The government has been conducting a review of cases potentially affected by the error, which arose when some people who were receiving incapacity benefit and severe disablement allowance had their claims converted to contributory ESA. However, officials at the Department for Work and Pensions failed to follow their own legal guidelines governing the transfer process, meaning that in many cases they failed to properly check the claimant's full entitlements. The review has been looking through 600,000 potential cases of those who have missed out. Some 122,000 people have now been repaid £5,000 each on average, according to the new figures. The ESA failure was overseen by the then Conservative former Secretary of State for Work and Pensions, Ian Duncan Smith. Now, why does that sound a familiar name? Who was in post for all but the last few months of the period covered by the damning Public Accounts Committee report. The current Housing Minister, Esther McVey, was a DWP Minister between 2013 and 2015. So another senior Conservative involved in this scandal. Evan Odell, a researcher at Disability Rights UK, said that 5,000 disabled people were denied proper support to live independently before they died is scandalous, as is the 112,000 people who had to wait years for these errors to be corrected. To make matters worse, the problems with the employment and support allowance system that have led to hundreds of millions of pounds of arrears payments are still present. 75% of ESA applicants who appeal DWP decisions to Social Security Tribunal win. This case is merely one more piece of evidence showing how the ESA is not fit for purpose, Marcia de Cordova MP has said. It's a national scandal that a decade of delay has meant that 5,000 ill and disabled people have died before receiving the money that they were owed as a result of the ESA underpayments. The government must now speedily complete the remaining reassessments for thousands of people still waiting, so that everyone who has lost out receives payment as quickly as possible. The Conservatives have consistently failed the sick and the disabled, and continued delay in righting this wrong is disgraceful. The department said that it has finished processing 97% of potentially affected cases, and so far, around 1% of those have resulted in arrears payment in respect of a claimant who has passed away. A DWP spokesperson said, "We have worked hard to ensure that anyone affected by this issue receives the benefits they're entitled to, and in a minority of cases where a claimant has sadly died, we have paid to their next of kin." In 2018, a cross-party group of MPs criticised the DWP's culture of indifference after it took 6 years to correct the error. The cost of fixing the error, which the PAC report said stemmed from a string of avoidable management failures, was expected to cost the DWP at least £340 million in back payments to claimants and £14 million in administrative costs. The figures showing that the 5,000 of those affected date from the 12th of January 2020. The DWP expects them to change as staff continue to work on the exercise and check potentially affected cases. What a mess.
Well, and again, it's this incompetence.
And it always seems to be incompetence that fails the most vulnerable people in society.
Yes.
What a strange thing that is. It's
Yes.
always the weakest and most vulnerable people.
Yes.
But for a mistake like this to go for 6 years, before being corrected is unbelievable.
Yes, because for 6 years the Conservatives have been in power, but they won't be listening to vulnerable people.
I guess those vulnerable people are not the people who vote for them.
They're not the people who vote for them, so why would they listen to them? That's the way they think.
Well, it certainly shows in their attitude, I think, in this particular story. Now,
Correction. They didn't used to vote for them.
Well, you think
Look
perhaps
what's
maybe
happening now up in the northeast.
Well, you may well be right. Who knows? And on to our next story this evening, and this one involves the Labour Party, for a change.
All right.
And Ian Murray has told the Labour leadership candidates to grasp issues before talking. A bit like engaging your brain before opening your mouth, I think,
Yes.
in this case. Scotland's only Labour MP has called on his party's leadership contenders not to come north of the border and talk about Scottish issues without any attempt to understand them first.
Yeah, what an admission that,
It is, isn't it?
I mean, does he not even talk to them? Do they not listen to him either?
Who knows? Anyway, launching his own campaign for Labour deputy leadership on Thursday morning, Ian Murray made the plea. "I say to all leadership and deputy leadership candidates, please don't come up to Scotland and talk about things when you're not quite sure what you're talking about. Just make sure in the first instance that you at least try and understand." I'm honestly gobsmacked by this piece of news that they have to make this clear to candidates to do this.
Yes.
As the Scottish Labour leadership faces a torrent of complaints about the party's equivocal position on both independence and Brexit after its worst general election result in the modern era, Murray told an audience of activists at his old high school in Wester Hailes in Edinburgh, "Straddling those two constitutional issues means we don't stand up for anything." In other words, it's a bit like trying to sit on two stools at once. Taking a swipe at the Shadow Chancellor, John McDonnell, who prompted an ongoing row between the Scottish and UK parties when he said that Labour should allow Holyrood to stage a second independence referendum if MSPs vote for one, Murray added, "Let's never again have a senior member of the Labour Party coming to a fringe show at the Edinburgh Festival and changing our constitutional position." Now, he's actually right in this, because McDonnell did exactly that. He came up and said what he thought should be done. I guess he meant it as a personal remark, but it came across as a major policy shift by the Labour Party.
A bit like once in a generation.
Unfortunately so. When you say something like that, it comes back to bite you.
Yes.
Anyway, Mr Murray, who came second in the ballot of party MPs behind the strong favourite for deputy, Angela Rayner, told reporters, "I wouldn't talk about anything that's happening in Salford, where Rebecca Long-Bailey is MP, or in Norwich, where Clive Lewis is MP, without having spoken to them and been completely across the issues." So it's not different coming up to Scotland. Come and listen to the membership and the public, and if you can do that, you'll have a much better formulation of the biggest issue in Scottish politics. Mr Lewis, who has since pulled out of the leadership race, and Long-Bailey, who said that the party needs to accept the case for a second independence referendum, along with other senior Labour figures, including the former Cabinet Minister Ben Bradshaw and a number of defeated MPs. Murray himself remains opposed to the prospect. So the only Labour MP left in Scotland is still clinging to this opposition to another independence referendum. Murray said that he had already spoken to Jess Phillips and Keir Starmer about Scotland, and also had plans to speak to Lisa Nandy, which brings us to the next part of the story. Nandy had faced heavy criticism for her comments about Catalan independence movement made during an interview with Andrew Neil on Wednesday. Nandy had told Neil, "We should look outwards to other countries where they've had to deal with divisive nationalism and seek to discover the lessons from when, in those brief moments in history, places like Catalonia and Quebec, we have managed to beat the narrow divisive nationalism with a social justice agenda." Wow. Just wow. What do you make of that comment?
Well, that created a huge Twitter storm, quite rightly.
I can imagine. And what sort of things have been said?
Oh, really good stuff from the Yes supporters. Very intelligent responses. There wasn't too much anger. It was more a focused education towards Lisa Nandy. And anybody who tweeted her stuff. And then Ian Dunt, of course, came in.
Did he?
And he came in very flamboyantly and said, I've been busy or something and I've missed out on something, I won't catch up. And then he said, I just caught briefly Lisa Nandy talking about this to the Andrew Neil interview. And she was doing really well and I was very impressed, etc., etc. Well, the whole thing started again and all the responses to his ignorance about it.
So he basically threw petrol in the fire, did he?
They did. And the silly man tried to turn it back onto the people who had responded. And he just made himself look even more foolish.
Well, I mean, a lot of people have made comments about comparing Scotland to Spain, or comparing the United Kingdom to Spain. The SNP had criticised Lisa Nandy after the Labour leadership candidate stated she would deny the people of Scotland a choice over their future if she became leader, going as far as to suggest that she would follow the example of independence movements suppressed through violence. A clear reference to the riot police being used in Catalonia, and also the imprisoning of politicians, which is something which I don't think has happened in Europe since the war. But,
well, I have to say that on Politics at Lunchtime with Joe Coburn, but it wasn't Joe Coburn this time, it was Andrew Neil, and he brought up the subject and he was absolutely clear that she had made a right cobblers of it.
Well, I see some reference to that actually in some of the items on our script this evening. Also, when asked by the BBC's Andrew Neil if she backed Scotland's democratic right to choose their own future if the Scottish Parliament returned an independence referendum majority, Nando replied no, and referred to learning lessons from Catalonia, where democratically elected political leaders have been jailed. Earlier, Nandy's fellow leadership challenger, Jess Phillips, was criticised after being hopelessly out of touch with Scotland, after refusing to accept Scotland's right to choose, stating that, "I don't think we should have another referendum on Scottish independence," whilst claiming that a majority did not support a referendum despite the SNP winning more than 80% of the seats in Scotland on a mandate to hold an independence referendum. In commenting, SNP MP Tommy Shepherd had said, "There is a running anti-democratic theme dominating the Labour leadership contest, and it only confirms why the Labour Party is in such a state of utter disarray in Westminster, in its Scottish branch office, and why it is hopelessly out of touch with the people of Scotland. With Lisa Nandy even lurching so far to the extremes by condoning violence and imprisonment as a way to oppose independence, it suggests that there is a deeper problem rotting at the core of the Labour Party. With the SNP winning more than 80% of the seats in Scotland on a mandate to hold an independence referendum, all the Labour leadership candidates must make clear whether they respect democracy or whether they will instead follow the lead of Tory leader Boris Johnson in denying democracy. The people of Scotland must have the choice of a better future than the broken Westminster system being imposed on us. That's not a decision that is a decision solely for the people of Scotland, not Boris Johnson, not Lisa Nandy, or any other detached Westminster politicians." So I think, I mean, I kind of, yeah, I mean, you do. You would expect Tommy to make exactly that sort of comment, given this kind of story to respond to.
Yeah.
Asked about Nandy's remarks during First Minister's questions on Thursday, Nicola Sturgeon said that she was going to give her the benefit of the doubt. And I think, to me, that sounds like a little bit of condescension, doesn't it? Sort of pat on the head, never mind, you get it right next time.
Well, she does come over, this is Lisa Nandy, she does come over as a sort of primary school, perhaps a high flyer in primary 7, moving up to the secondary school.
That's a good one. I don't remember that one. Okay. To tie this story up, Nicola had said that she was going to give her the benefit of the doubt and that she had not paid attention to what had happened in Catalonia, but had called on leadership hopefuls to clarify her remarks and apologise if necessary.
So she's not off the hook yet.
Yeah.
Well, Ian Dunt has kind of, not apologised, but he has kind of apologised.
Has he tried to pour oil on troubled waters?
Yes, he's definitely tried to pour oil on troubled waters.
Well, speaking of troubled waters, brings us to the White House. The White House broke the law by withholding Ukraine aid, a congressional agency has said. The White House violated federal law by withholding a scrutiny aid approved by lawmakers for Ukraine, a non-partisan congressional watchdog said on Thursday. In a blow for US President Donald Trump as the Senate prepared to hold a trial on whether to remove him from office. The Democratic-led House of Representatives on Wednesday sent the Senate 2 charges that it passed last month accusing Trump of an abuse of power and obstruction of Congress arising from his dealings with Ukraine, clearing the way for only the 3rd impeachment trial of a president to begin in earnest next week. The abuse of power cited by the House included Trump's withholding of $391 million in security aid for Ukraine, a move which Democrats said was aimed at pressuring Kiev into investigating political rival Joe Biden, the Republican president's possible Democratic opponent in the November 3rd US election. A pivotal event leading to Trump's impeachment was a July 25th phone call in which he asked the Ukraine's president to investigate Biden and his son Hunter Biden over unsubstantiated allegations of corruption, and to look into a discredited theory that the Ukraine and not Russia had interfered in the 2016 US elections. So another development here today, there seems to be no end of little twists and turns in this tale, as bits and pieces of information are kept back.
Yes.
And there are all kinds of forces at work trying both to protect Mr. Trump and to impeach him at the same time. Congress approved the $391 million to help the Ukraine combat Russian-backed separatists in the eastern part of the country. The money ultimately was provided to Kiev in September after the controversy had spilled into public view. Democrats have said that Trump abused his power by asking a foreign government to interfere in a US election for his own benefit at the expense of American national security. Republicans have argued that Trump's actions did not rise to the level of impeachable offences. They have accused the Democrats of using the Ukraine affair as a way to nullify Trump's 2016 election victory.
Which is true.
It's also possibly a method of perhaps spiking his guns for the next presidential election coming up. I think it's next year.
Is it?
Process begins 2021, I believe.
Right.
Somebody I'm sure will correct me. Pardon me. A faithful execution of the law does not permit the president to substitute his own policy priorities for those that Congress has enacted into law. The Government Accountability Office concluded, referring to the fact that Congress had already voted to appropriate the funds. An arm of Congress, the GAO, is viewed as a top auditing agency for the federal government that advises lawmakers and various government entities on how taxpayer dollars are spent. While the agency's assessment was a setback to Trump, it was unclear how or if it would figure in his trial in the Republican-led Senate, given that the key issues, such as whether witnesses will appear or whether new evidence will be considered, remained up in the air. Democrats have said that the GAO report showed the importance of the Senate hearing from witnesses and considering new documents in the trial. This reinforces, again, the need for documents and eyewitnesses in the Senate, the House Speaker Nancy Pelosi has told a news conference. So Nancy's obviously, again, coming back and saying that they must stop trying to prevent evidence being presented. That seems to be the game here between the upper house and the House of Representatives. Is one is trying to hold back information, I guess.
Yes.
The House voted on Wednesday 228 to 193, largely along party lines, to give the Senate the task of putting Trump on trial.
I wonder if Trump advised Boris not to release the Russian papers.
That's an interesting insight. It's possible, I suppose. It certainly would link up with this theme of trying not to allow this kind of information to get into the public domain. It might also fan the flames of his impeachment if there was a link in Boris's documents.
Yeah, which I believe.
And you know how Boris is so keen to have a close arrangement or close deal with President Trump.
Yes.
It could well be that he is helping to prevent that information coming out. Who knows? Trump has denied all wrongdoing and has called the impeachment process a sham. The GAO issued its opinion after receiving a letter inquiring about the aid from the Democratic Senator Chris Van Hollen. The agency's findings are not legally binding, but its reports are seen by lawmakers as objective, reliable, and generally uncontested. The GAO has no prosecutorial power. Its report noted that the US Constitution grants a president no unilateral authority to withhold funds in the way that Trump did. Instead, the president has strictly circumscribed authority to withhold spending only in limited circumstances expressly provided by law. Holding up money for a policy reason, which the Trump administration did in this case, is not permitted, the report said. So again, this report is actually, although it is supposedly an unbiased report, it's clearly stating that Mr. Trump didn't have the right to do what he did, apparently.
Well, but I mean, it can still be unbiased if it's speaking the truth.
Indeed, yes, I suppose so. It's not as if they're making this up.
If it's a fact that he held it up.
One of the things that strikes me about this is the fact that the only reason that Trump can be held to account is because America has a written constitution.
Really?
And without the written constitution, his duties and the range of his authority would not be circumscribed in that way without a written constitution. And we've seen...
Didn't Robert the Bruce have a lot to answer for? You know,
Well,
without his declaration of independence, they wouldn't have got bits of their written constitution, and without
Yep.
the Scots going over, and it was a lot of Scots that created that constitution to
indeed, yeah.
fit their own circumstances.
And it did use the Arbroath Declaration as a
Yes.
baseline model. Yeah.
Yes.
And now to the Middle East. Syrian airstrikes in Idlib have left at least 21 people dead despite the ceasefire. At least 21 civilians have been killed in airstrikes in Idlib amid continuing offensive by Bashar al-Assad's forces despite a supposed ceasefire in Syria's last opposition-held province. These strikes, carried out by the Syrian Air Force and its Russian allies, hit a market and an industrial zone in Idlib city in a ferocious attack on Wednesday that destroyed several buildings and set cars on fire, with motorists trapped inside. Footage from the scene showed houses on the same street levelled as rescue workers struggled to free those trapped under rubble. Children and rescue workers were among the dead, the UK-based Monitor, the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, has said. Idlib province on the Turkish border in northwest Syria has been increasingly targeted by bombing in recent weeks after several failed or stillborn ceasefires brokered by Russia and Turkey over the past 18 months. So the ceasefire which was arranged or they were trying to arrange, it's not lasted very long again.
No.
The agreement to halt the air and ground attacks was supposed to go into effect on the 12th of January, and it never materialised, according to the story. Artillery shelling, rocket fire continued without pause. It seems that the government forces are just 7 kilometres from the major rebel town of Maret al-Numan after heavy clashes on Wednesday night. It seems that this, we're getting to the closing battles now for Bashar al-Assad. He's trying to
Do you think?
consolidate his territory now, I think, by mopping up whatever areas he can. At least 29 government troops and allied militia fighters were also killed in the fighting, the SOHR has said. The Syrian state news agency, SANA, later reported that at least 4 civilians were killed by rocket fire on the government-held city of Aleppo. Government attacks are focused on an area around the strategic M5 highway, which Assad is determined to capture in order to reopen the route linking the capital, Damascus, with Aleppo. So there's quite a lot of detail in here, and Assad is obviously, trying to, as I say, consolidate and finish what he started. Now we're coming back to the UK and talking about the Bank of England's outgoing CEO, Mark Carney, who is to serve as the UK government climate advisor in a rather surprising move, I think most people thought. The outgoing Bank of England Governor Mark Carney will advise the Prime Minister Boris Johnson in the run-up to a major United Nations climate conference taking place in Glasgow this November, Britain's government said on Thursday. Carney steps down from the Bank of England in March and has already accepted a role as a UN envoy on finance and climate change, taking over from the former New York Mayor Michael Bloomberg, who is running to become the next President of the United States. His expertise will help the UK to lead in mobilising businesses and investors to support our net zero revolution, Johnson said in a statement after a meeting with Carney. Now, this strikes me as a little bit unusual for Boris Johnson to make an appointment for dealing with the climate emergency. He's never shown any particular interest in this before.
He hasn't, but politically he can't afford not to.
You think he's now been it's forced his hand now?
Yeah.
And I know that, what's his name, the famous naturalist today?
Yes.
David Attenborough was making a very impassioned statement today saying that this is the crisis moment.
Yes.
And of course this might well be Boris Johnson trying to take the wind out of the sails of the SNP's triumph of winning the COP25 bid.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
COP26 bid, I beg your pardon, to bringing that conference to Glasgow.
Yes, it will be, and he's already made a fool of himself by saying that Nicola Sturgeon won't be allowed to be present. As if that could ever come to pass.
It sounds a little bit like the Commonwealth Games all over again.
Yes.
But But it is important, isn't it? Because as far as Scotland is concerned, we are one of the leading countries in adopting green technologies and developing them.
Yeah, and without us, the rest of the UK is way down the scale in terms of climate mitigation.
Do you think that our early adoption of offshore wind energy, tidal energy and so forth have given us...
And if you remember, the Tory party were very quick to try and put the lid on that. And remember, they halted the payments?
They halted payments to onshore wind.
Yes.
Completely.
Yes.
Just pulled the rug out.
Just pulled the rug, and investors got really stung. He also, or they also pulled investments on solar panels and photovoltaic panels.
That's right.
And I always felt at the time this was to pull the rug under Scotland's speed, because Alex Salmond was really driving it like mad.
He was, even to the point of going up against Trump.
Yes, and he put a prize out for somebody to develop tidal.
The Saltire Prize, I think it's called.
Yes, yes. So, you know, we have led thanks to the vision of Alex Salmond and others.
We have indeed. Also, we have the world's highest performing tidal energy system already developed and in place, providing power right now.
Yes.
So we are definitely ahead of the game.
We are, but where we are failing is in not producing the structures of these things.
Yeah.
And even the rest of the UK is failing in that.
I can just imagine the impact it would have if Scotland has an independence referendum before the COP26.
Yes.
And if it has it in September or October, just before all the countries of the world come to Scotland to talk about climate change, how much more we could do.
Yes, yes, so we certainly could do a lot
and
more.
And that dovetails actually very nicely with the next item, because the next item is about offshore wind.
Yes.
And Scottish companies will benefit from new steps to increase the number of offshore wind contracts staying in Scotland. Developers will have to agree a supply chain commitment when applying for offshore wind leases under an agreement between the Scottish Government and the Crown Estates Scotland. Representatives from the UK Government, trades unions and industry attended the summit in Edinburgh to discuss solutions to the issues facing the offshore wind energy supply chain. The Economy Secretary, Derek Mackay, said Scotland is an ideal location for offshore wind, but recent projects have not delivered the significant economic opportunities that we want to see for Scottish businesses. It's actually something that we often complain, that a lot of these turbines are built by companies in Scandinavia, and that we don't seem to be getting the work
That's
for our
exactly
engineering
what I was
companies.
saying, yes.
So this obviously is going to, I hope, address this. The Scottish Government has been calling for the offshore sector to do more by awarding contracts to our indigenous supply chain.
Yes.
But recent disappointments suggest that more has to be done. I'll use every lever at our disposal to ensure that our renewable supply chain benefits from the expansion of offshore wind in our waters, leading to the creation and retention of Scottish jobs. And I've just been told actually that one of the supply chains actually was providing hardware from Indonesia, of all places. So it's been coming from a great deal further away. Now also, I'm just going to follow the story a little further. The measures agreed with the Crown Estate Scotland will help to release more of those economic benefits for the Scottish economy and to ensure that Scottish-based supply chain is considered when tendering for the work or making long-term conditions. Colin Palmer, the Director of Marine for Crown Estate Scotland, said, Scotland has unique potential when it comes to offshore wind, and we're committed to doing all that we can to unlock that opportunity. ScotWind Leasing will present Scotland as an attractive destination for the significant investment needed to deliver the scale of offshore wind projects we want to see. Now, he's not actually saying that he's going to be ordering from the Scottish supply chain, I noticed from this. However, the Scottish Government is very clearly saying that it wants to see that.
Yes.
So let us hope that the Scottish Government succeeds. What's your take on wind turbines, Day? I mean, you live in the hills in the Highlands of Scotland. Have you an opinion on wind turbines?
Well, Central Belt I live. There is one wind farm that did cause a visual outrage and still does to an extent, although it's bedded in now, and that's the one outside Stirling that Doon Estates own. It has bedded in. It's not quite as offensive as it used to be, but you can see it for miles. But then other wind farms, and in general I like them, you know, when you're going up those heights up above Edinburgh, Sutra Hill, and they rise up in front of you, and then there's a new one up round Fintry, and again, if you're going up through Kippen and up over Fintry, the hills suddenly appear, and then also there's a new windmill up there, and it just suddenly appears, and you think, whoa.
I always think there's something rather elegant, and it's the quietness of them that always strikes you. The fact that they go round, they're so massive, and yet no sound, really.
No sound. And yet there did used to be a problem, I think, in the very early days with the sound.
Many years
of them.
ago, I think, the actual generators in the hub had quite noisy bearings, and they would transmit sound through the ground. I think they've largely got rid of that problem now.
Quite a few of my local farmers have got smaller windmills that you don't need planning permission for.
But of course, the issue here with the offshore windmills takes all of that offshore, so it's not so much seen.
Well, unless you've got Donald Trump with your binoculars.
Well, yes, and you're worried that you're going to slice your shot over the rough because you're looking at a windmill. But what I was going to say was that obviously it's windier at sea. There is nothing in the way of the wind except open ocean, so there is always more energy.
So you don't need to cut down the forestry to...
And also, I think wind energy is a lot more reliable in terms of there's nearly always wind somewhere.
Always wind out there, yes. Well, we have the most wind of the whole of Europe, is that not right?
We certainly have at least 25% of the available wind energy in Europe, at least that. But we've developed a lot more of it than many other countries. And of course, if we can use some of this surplus energy to create hydrogen, we'll have a fuel for heating our homes as well.
That's right, yes. Did you know that in the Netherlands, now I'm not sure whether it's the trams or the trains, but the whole system is run on wind energy throughout the whole country.
Wouldn't surprise me.
I know it's not a big country, but...
No, but the Netherlands has a very strong historical connection with windmills because they used them for decades to pump water out of the land. So I guess it's a natural thing if you're from Holland. Anyway, moving on to other rural matters tonight, and this is a story regarding rural doctors, GPs. In a series of recommendations aimed at improving primary healthcare for remote, rural and island communities have been welcomed by the Health Secretary Jeane Freeman. The recommendations, which include developing a national centre for remote rural island care and reaffirming commitments to maintaining GP income, are made in a report by the Remote and Rural Working Group chaired by Sir Lewis Ritchie. Ms Freeman said, much of Scotland is rural and those who live in remote and rural communities have a right to expect access to the highest quality medical care. The new GP contract is bringing improvements and the working group was established to help ensure that challenges specific to rural areas were addressed. Today's recommendations aim to enhance primary care across remote, rural and island communities by ensuring stability for rural GP incomes alongside other measures that support innovative approaches to the use of information technology and physical infrastructure, as well as recruitment and the retention of practices. I thank Sir Lewis and his colleagues for all the work involved in developing this important report and look forward to continuing to work with them and others to continually improve the GP contract. Now, I know, because you live in the countryside, that this is an issue which people moan about a lot sometimes, that they have to travel sometimes a long distance if you live in the Highlands.
Not me.
Not you personally.
No, we're not what you would call remote rural. We have a fantastic
You're within an hour
collection of GP surgeries. Oh, easily. I'm within 5 minutes.
And your GP is fairly local?
GP, dentist, opticians, we've got everything, and just next to the GP surgery there's a group has opened up with all sorts of other alternative therapies as well. So we're very
You're well
lucky.
Served then.
We're very well served, but the islands are a different matter. I mean, the logistics of the islands are so challenging, and the weather.
Well, that's the thing. How do you get
Yeah,
a GP
I mean, the
surgery
ferries
if you
have
have
been
to get
off
a
because
ferry.
of the gales that we've had. So if you're having a baby and it's an emergency and you can't get across, even with a helicopter, you'd be struggling probably.
Well, I'm going to quote Sir Lewis Ritchie, who's a man who's authored this report, and he says that the future well-being of Scottish general practice and primary care is of paramount importance both to those who receive and deliver services. I hope this report, kindly informed by both the health professionals and public representatives, will help to underpin excellence and sustainability of future services in remote and rural areas throughout Scotland. So a report such as this is obviously just a start, really, isn't it?
Yes.
I mean, many people living, particularly on islands, know what the issues are, but largely the voices don't get heard very often.
Well, I don't know. I think they do, but the reality is, when you're living on an island or in a remote rural, the external negatives that there are, that nobody has any control over.
Thinking about, attracting people from, say, the Central Belt as GPs to come to these remote places, to the islands, they have to put together some kind of package for them, really, to relocate.
That they do have control over.
Yeah.
Yes.
But it's then keeping them there as well in that location,
Yes.
and making sure that everybody connects with them.
Yes. I wonder, do you know my dentist has, well, I've see different dentists quite often. They're all, mainly all girls, I have to say, and they're terrific. But at least two of them have gone off to Malawi or somewhere doing exchange dentistry. So why can't we be doing this on the islands?
Oh, I see. So have a kind of exchange system
Yes.
where one professional replaces another for a few months,
That's
something
right.
like that.
Yes.
I suppose that's possible. Maybe you should contact the gentleman concerned. I'm trying to remember his name now because I've gone past that bit of the script. Sir Lewis Ritchie will be. So yeah, that sounds like a very sensible idea. We're moving on to our next story, and this one is, again, I think, a good news story from reading the headline here. 170,000 children are eligible for a new benefit. Applications will be taken in advance for Scottish Child Payment to help with expected high demand. An estimated 170,000 children will be eligible for the new £10 weekly Scottish Child Payment when it goes live later this year. To help manage the demand, families will be invited to apply in advance for the benefit being introduced in the autumn. Parents will be able to apply by post, phone or online. Applications will be assessed for eligibility in the autumn with the first payments made by Christmas. Just in time for Christmas, sounds like a good thing. In addition, in an additional move to assist families, Best Start grant payments, Best Start foods and the new Scottish Child Payment will all be available through a single application, making it more straightforward for people to access the money that they're entitled to. Again, this is such a good idea, is it not, to streamline the application for not just one of these benefits, but for 3 at a time.
That's right, yes.
Simplifies things so much.
So much, yes.
I know because I've got children, and I remember filling out forms for all sorts of benefits and tax credits, how complicated it was. And I imagine that if you're struggling by on very little money, that kind of hassle is something you could do without.
That's the last thing you need.
Anyway, let me see. The Scottish Social Security Secretary, Anne Somerville, said that the Scottish Child Payment has rightly been described as game-changing in terms of the potential to reduce child poverty. And that is why we're doing everything we can to introduce this as early as possible, whilst ensuring that we do so in a way that is safe and secure and protects implementation plans for the other social security benefits. When we launched the Best Start grant payments, we experienced significant demand with 14,000 applications in the week that we opened the school age payment. With 170,000 children from approximately 140,000 households expected to qualify for the Scottish Child Payment, eligibility is on an unprecedented scale. And as this is a recurring payment, it also brings additional complexity. We're gearing up to process applications carefully, accurately and efficiently. We are building capacity across our processes, systems and premises and people And with the rollout plan, we're asking families to help us by getting their applications in early so that we can process and start making the payments as quickly as possible once this new benefit has been introduced. So it's nice for us here in the studio to be able to make this announcement to families watching the programme tonight that now is the time to start looking at applying for these benefits. And now
That's called getting on with the day job, isn't it?
Yeah. Another story again in Scotland, and this is access to higher education. And Scottish universities are ahead of schedule on closing the deprivation gap. Scotland's universities have nearly met the interim target set for widening access, 2 years ahead of schedule. Higher Education Statistics Agency, or HESA, figures out for the academic year 2018-19 show that 15.9% of full-time first-degree entrants to Scottish universities came from the nation's 20% most deprived areas, just under the target of 16% by 2021. The figures also showed that there was a continued rise in the number of Scottish domiciled enrolments to Scottish higher education institutions, which now stands at 163,470, a rise of 1.6% since 2017-18. It's the highest number of enrolments since 2010-2011. So it seems that the figures are on the rise for higher education.
Yes.
The first fall in EU enrolment numbers since the expansion of the EU in 2004. Now, I think we can probably safely say that there's a reason for a fall in the number of EU students coming to Scottish universities. It may be that they have been put off by the environment that they're being asked to
I would say so.
to have to come into.
Yes.
There's been a record 253,475 students who were enrolled at Scottish higher education institutes in 2018-19, a 2.6% increase from last year, and a 10%, more than 10% rise since 2006-07. The Higher Education Minister, Richard Lochhead, has said these figures show the tremendous progress that Scotland's universities are making in higher education, not only more inclusive than ever, but also attracting a rising number of Scots overall. The proportion of full-time first-degree entrants from the most deprived areas in Scotland is at its highest level on record, giving many more people, no matter their circumstances, an equal chance of success. That means we're on the verge of meeting a key milestone for widening access, just 0.1% points shy of the target, 2 years ahead of schedule. This is very welcome news.
Good.
So the universities themselves seem to have taken this upon themselves.
Yes.
I mean, the Scottish Government has provided the wherewithal for them to do this, but for a target to almost be getting hit 2 years ahead of schedule, I think it's quite incredible.
Yes, yes.
And we know that Scotland, particularly the central belt areas like Glasgow and Edinburgh, and some other places too, have higher than normal deprivation.
Yes.
And as somebody pointed out to me last week, that every one of the 10 poorest areas in Europe is in Glasgow.
Really?
Which I found was absolutely astonishing. That they claimed this is verifiable. It may well be true. I can't comment on the accuracy of that statement, but if it's true,
I've seen a map
shocking.
with that.
The fall in EU students is the first in a very long time, and that number could well be worsened by damaging Brexit, with serious consequences for our higher education sector and for Scotland as a whole. So at a time when the uptake of university places for our poorest members of society is increasing, we're seeing our European youngsters shut out the Scottish system.
Yes.
It's very sad. Which brings us back to the European Union and the EU flag. The Scottish Parliament corporate body has been criticised for insisting that the EU flag will be taken down after the 31st of March. What a peculiar thing to do, but
it is odd, isn't it?
It's actually, I think it was a misprint. It should be after the 31st of January.
Yes.
A mistaken
What is the corporate body?
The corporate body is, I believe, the committee which runs the Parliament buildings and their environment.
Right.
So the grounds, the building, and all the rest of it.
Right.
And
So
it's
they're
a civil
entirely
service
independent
department.
of.
Indeed, not a political body, or not
No.
supposed to be.
Uh-huh.
But they are responsible for looking after the buildings and the grounds.
Mm-hmm. And when
And
flags fly.
The general management of the Parliament itself.
Right.
As far as I understand it, it's actually a group of MSPs are appointed to this
Right.
corporate body, or they're elected. There is a process for doing this.
Yeah.
But they've been criticised for insisting that the EU flag should be taken down
Right.
after the end of January. Now, I can imagine why many people will see that as a very sad
Yes.
piece of symbolism, really,
Yes. Particularly in Scotland.
where so many people are so unhappy.
Devastated that we're having to leave.
But it seems like just another
A kick in the teeth.
another insult to add to the many others
Yes,
that we've
yes.
faced recently. Well, I'm sorry to end the programme on such a downer tonight, but we're almost at the end of this. But flags generally in Scotland and during the independence referendum attained a sort of status and importance to people, which
Yes.
I don't remember them having before.
No,
You know, the
no.
saltire and, you know,
Yeah.
but the flags, I suppose, are the normal emblems of a state or a
Yes.
union.
Yes. And you know, outside an important building like the Parliament, then there ought to be flags.
And now there is going to be one fewer,
One
I
fewer.
believe.
I think that's really sad that they've done that. Who are these MSPs?
That I don't know. We could perhaps find out.
No doubt we will find out who they are,
eventually.
and no doubt their constituents may have something to say to them.
Yeah. Well, I remember there was a great stooshy over the raising of the Union flag over Edinburgh
Yes.
Castle as well, and
Yes.
Stirling Castles.
Yes.
Okay, I'm just hearing that the SNP and the Greens on the corporate body were for keeping the EU flag flying,
Yes.
but they were outvoted by the other parties' MSPs.
The union parties.
Which, considering the fact that this particular group, this corporate body, is supposed to be non-political,
Right.
uh,
But how odd that it's the union parties.
yeah,
I did see somebody saying something on Twitter about it's time we stop just Tory bashing, because the real problem is the union, and that's not just the Tories.
well, I suppose that's true, Day, and in this case,
There's the
Yeah,
proof.
apparently Ken McIntosh has insisted that this is the right thing to do, but we know where Mr. McIntosh's loyalties lie, I think.
Yes.
Anyway, but we'll leave that to Mr. McIntosh to answer for himself. Anyway, we have just about reached the end of the show tonight, Day. Thanks
Right.
again very much for your input on tonight's programme.
Zoomed by.
Which leaves me with my usual message to the audience out there, which is that making programmes for you is an expensive business, and Broadcasting Scotland, we rely on you to continue to support us in this effort. So if you would like to sign up as a supporter of Broadcasting Scotland, you can do so by following the instructions at the bottom of your screen now. You may also, if you wish, make a donation. If you can't sign up for a monthly £5 a month, that's okay. You can always make a donation. All of that money will be used to make programmes for you in the future. Anyway, that's about it from us at Scotland at 7 tonight. So from Day and myself and from the whole team here at Broadcasting Scotland, a very good night to you.